Good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Assalamu alaikum. Sabah bkhair.
Good morning, Rajbash, in my native tongue.
Dean, I am from the Middle East Research Institute, otherwise...
I am from the Middle East Research Institute, based in Erbil, Iraq.
A group of speakers to talk about a big issue, and that is Iran, the omnipresent throughout this conference and elsewhere. On my left, somebody who doesn't need introduction, more famous than to be introduced, Princess Ebtesam Al-Ketbi. We've got Sanam, or Sanam in Arabic. Yes, Sanam. And in writing is Sanam Vatanka. You have to correct our pronunciations later. She's from the Chatham House in the United Kingdom. And we've got Alex Vatanka. That is the Persian pronunciation of it. And he is a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute in Washington. And we have Mr. Alzghoul. He is a senior fellow at the Emirates Research Center. We've got such a group of experts to talk about Iran. And we will focus on Iran's foreign policy, Iran, the way we look at it from outside and the way they look at the outside world. We look at the various hot issues to do with Iran, one of which is relates to the Gulf, the way the Gulf people are managing, tackling, handling Iran, and also we go into issues like JCPOA and current affairs that happen inside Iran. But I'm going to start from the theme of this conference, the way we started very nicely with His Excellency Dr. Gargash outlined his country's foreign policy across. He summarized it in 7 bullet points, but in many of them there's indirect reference to the immediate neighbors, Iran being one of them. And Dr. Ketbi, you too, in your speech, referred indirectly to Iran and elsewhere. But now we're going to ask you specifically to talk about Iran. You both emphasized soft power and difficulties in handling certain countries. But despite those difficulties, you always focus on dialogue, de-escalation, and using your soft power to attract inward investment and create interdependence. So Iran must be a very good example how to have difficult relations. You have multifaceted relation, but also ability to coexist, live together, and move along. So I'm really interested to know whether this is working or not, but you tell us how you characterized your relationship, UAE, with Iran.
شكرا دكتور علاء.
Thank you, Dr. Ala. I do not say that there is kind of divergence between us as Gulf and as UAE and Iran regarding the present and the future of the region. And this is in the nature of the alliances between these countries and Iran. Most of the issues that I want to be speaking about tackle around the regional hegemony of Iran when it comes to the program of rocket programs and the drones and the nuclear program. And definitely the regional penetration and the behavior when it comes to the framework of the normal state respecting the international laws. I do not look at that as hindering the track of negotiations with Iran. In reality, there are geopolitical conflicts as Emiratis, as Gulf, as Arabs with Iran. There are definitely files due to geography, due to the current geopolitical situation. We are governed by it, and it is pushing us towards dealing with these files. The files that affect sustainable development in the region. Most of these files that need cooperation amongst us and with Iran is the power, is environment, is food security, water security, the marine security, and the land security, and the regional trade. The region in the past few years, when it comes to Iran and the Gulf countries, were really into the geopolitical confrontations and the threats as well. But these files are of vital importance, and it is checking the good thinking of Iran, whether there was a desire to participate in the formation of the future of this region on diversity.
This is a nice start.
Kenneth.
Dr. Alzghoul, you might be an observant of this region's تريد نحكي عربي بس لازم تتحمل عربيتي لأن أنا ما أفرق بين المذكر والمؤنث.
You have to tolerate my Arabic language. I do not differ between plural and singular. My politics in the Gulf, the GCC countries and the members, of course, previously it was focused on Iran. But there were convergence and conflicts, definitely. But the UAE, along with Saudi, were, in the forefront in some of the files, security, environment, economic, and so on and so forth. But in the UAE, there is a kind of divergence. At one time, they were in the forefront to enter to Yemen, along with Saudi, to enter in a war. And they were in Syria. They had certain stances. In Libya as well, certain diverging that differ from Qatar and other countries. What is there and the harmony between the GCC countries, it is reflecting, the divergence are reflecting in other regions, but it seems that they are, changing their policies. Can you explain to us what happened previously and the current situation? How do you see these contradictions? Thank you, Dr. Dlawer, for this question. In reality, perhaps the secret word lies in there is a fact that the pocket of competition to the centrality of geopolitical issues, to the geo-economic issues, the region due to Corona and the extension of the geopolitical conflicts for more than 2 decades in the region. All the countries in the region now have lost, and the loss was great. And this geopolitical conflict that we have seen in the region since the inception of the Arabic Spring until now, we have no winners whatsoever, even if some thought so, or there were slogans. And then Corona came, and the rise in the prices of oil would deepen issues, which made all parties to look into another form of coexistence, guys think that the secret when focusing on the geopolitical and competition, there are definitely common challenges that need, this common rapprochement, which will really build on political rapprochement. So the Emirati awareness for this change in the region has led to the establishment of this change, or the restoring towards the centrality of the geopolitical, geoeconomic aspects. And the UAE was in the forefront to solve solutions not only with Iran in particular, but with all powers in the region, which with which it had political problems. It opened on Israel, it opened on Turkey and the other countries in the region where there were problems back then. I think that it's a more comprehensive vision more than it looks like. I have an important question. I would like to add something that in this new issue for its politics, this change was also in its relations not only with Iran, with Turkey and the rest of the countries, and therefore the economic files are in the forefront when it comes to the Emirati-Iranian relations. When Dr. Girgash mentioned in his speech, he meant that the UAE, or Dr. Alzghoul is saying that this equation of the region is not profitable, and the economy will not be prosperous in a region filled with conflicts and struggles and wars. How can we relay this understanding to Iran? I think that this mentality is still governing in Iran, and as such, we can find the win-win equation. I shall leave you with a question. First of all, it is known that everyone is focusing on the Iranian threat. In the past, and even when you are investing in the economy, there are definitely movements when it comes to the cooperation of the international powers with the local powers and regional powers in an effort to find kind of dynamics, balanced one. And this balanced dynamic, the Iranians see it as against them. So the power alignment in the region needs to be defined, to get developed. Think of the question. Do not answer me now. I shall go back to you, Doctor. The same thing. But I want you to put yourself in the place of the Gulf with all its internal contradictions as Gulf. What makes you fear on the long run strategically? Believing in equality. What do you think? Your Kurdish dialect is great. Perfect.
The two speakers talked about, but I want to see whether you really think it's working, whatever they're trying. And we have seen drones coming and hitting Emirates, coming maybe from wherever, but definitely some coming from Yemen hitting Saudi Arabia. Is this working? But I want you also to add to it their alignment to the regional as well as global powers, to see how protected are they on this. I'll start with you. And I'm sorry that I, instead of saying Vakil, I said Vatanka. So Sanam Vakil is the correct name.
Thank you. It's an interesting question. Is it working? I think that the jury is out on this process of de-escalation. I think right now there is deep hope that it will work, but there remain some unresolved issues on the table. The first is what has been discussed and referenced in repeated panels, the JCPOA file. Doesn't seem to be moving forward, and in absence of that deal and in absence of clarity on a plan B to manage Iran's swiftly accelerating nuclear program, this remains a crisis point, and there is an opportunity through de-escalation and dialogue that is, of course, being led by the UAE in this context to try and manage the security challenges, particularly in the GCC area. But with the JCPOA uncertain, I think it's too early to make a prediction on how this is going to evolve. A second challenge, and I think a really important one, which perhaps showcases the direction of Iran's trajectory, is Iran's closer relationship with Russia. That has been made very clear through its export of drones and support of Russia in the war in Ukraine. And that really solidifies Iran's position and movement towards stronger relations with eastern states, particularly Russia and China. This is a policy that began in 2005 under President Ahmadinejad. It's taken a long time to get off the ground, but the war is serving as an opportunity for Iran to strengthen its ties and build what it sees to be a resistance axis, an axis that looks to challenge Western influence in the Middle East, an axis that looks to protect Iranian security and stability. And this trajectory really, I think, showcases Iran's unwillingness to transform at its heart, and suggests that it is doubling down on a policy of challenging the West and exporting destabilizing capacity beyond the region now. And this, of course, will be ultimately, I think, the big question for how Gulf states, but also Europe and the US, try to manage the direction that Iran is going.
Thank you. I think you nicely took us into the next big issues to do with nuclear deal. I'm going to come back to you, but specifically from you, I want to know, what is the Iranian thinking? What is the policy inside Iran? Do they really want JCPOA to work? Do they really want a deal now? And if so, what type of deal? Because they were able to frustrate everybody through negotiations. But I want you to put yourself in that position. Just tell us what the Iranians might be, from your reading, looking for. So I'll leave you with that question, but don't forget it. Organize your mind. And now, Alex, staying with the JCPOA, sure, because it's a good one. But instead of saying what it is, I want two very simple questions. Where is it? Is it actually going somewhere? But more importantly, what is the American policy?
Right.
Going back to the Obama administration, from our point of view, that is the Middle East point of view, we saw something rushed coming, that the Obama administration wanted a deal no matter what, as a legacy probably. Everybody cried for linking that to Iran's behavior in the region, its expansion policies, the way it was engaging regional powers, regional countries, and especially the fragile ones. And people also wanted that link to the missile programs that they had, the conventional weapons. I think the Obama administration ignored that. The Trump administration came, wanted to demolish that no matter what the cost. So irrespective of the consequences, exerted maximum pressure. To us, it didn't work because the Iranians moved on, got even closer to a nuclear bomb. With the Biden administration, where are we? We are neither Obama version 2.0, nor it's Trump, somewhere between. Give us some clarity. What is the American policy towards that?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me. I want to thank the Emirates Policy Center and personally Dr. Ebtesam for inviting me. Thank you. It's always great to be here. Look, if you don't mind, let me leave that to the very end. I just wanted to react to some of the comments we heard about what's going on in the region. Few fast bullet points from me, and then I get very fast because I think I want to link it up to the possible JCPOA 2.0. But let me start back at 2003. I think if you want to understand what Iran is doing in the region right now, at least in terms of their thinking calculations, and how the idea of forward defense was conceived, that you have to be in the region, that you have to fight your enemies outside the borders of Iran. This idea was born arguably in 1979, but really takes shape by the time the United States invades Iraq, removes Saddam Hussein in 2003. Fast forward to today. Is Iran's forward defense strategy something that they can sustain? And I think for three reasons they cannot sustain. One is the pressures at home. There is much Iranian opposition to the forward defense strategy and what Iran is doing in the region, because it costs Iran literally billions of dollars every year in expenses, and they don't see the return. They see why it makes sense ideologically, but they don't see how it's advancing Iran's national interests. That's number one. There's a lot of anger, and right now it's time, if you're sitting in Tehran, to rethink about your strategy going forward. Two, the region is ready for realignment. The region wants to cut deals from Saudi Arabia to UAE to others. Everybody's looking for ways to de-escalate and look for ways to cooperate. So that's great news, and the Iranians shouldn't let that opportunity go to waste. Lastly, if you're sitting in Tehran, there is no end of American sanctions on Iran anytime soon. Coming back to your point about JCPOA. Even if in a best case scenario you have a nuclear deal, you will have plenty of American sanctions staying on the books that which may prevent Iran from being a normal economy anytime soon. For that to happen, you really need major adjustments to Iran in terms of how it treats businesses and so forth that come in. So I think for that reason as well, the Iranians need to look for neighboring states, because that's how they actually get...
I'd rather you focus telling us about American thinking, because what Iran should do is something different. But you tell us, what is the American approach? What's their policy? Where are they taking this?
The Americans don't right now have a strategy. I was trying to come to that at the end because it's a very brief answer. So I was just giving myself some time. I don't think the Biden administration right now really knows what it wants to do vis-a-vis Iran. Sure, the United States doesn't want to see an Iranian nuclear weapon, right? But at the same time, there are those folks in Washington who are saying, go all out, support the Iranian opposition. Right. That brings the risk of Iran deciding, you know what, to hell with talks. I'm just going to go and weaponize. I'm becoming the next North Korea. The United States cannot afford that for obvious reasons. So right now we're in the gray zone. I don't see the U.S. having a policy while these protests in Iran continue. And let me say a final thing and I'll stop. When the Iranian government decided to send those drones to Ukraine, to Russia for the deployment in Ukraine, the message is on the wall. If the leadership in Tehran wanted to choose to preserve the nuclear negotiations and bring about a nuclear deal, sending drones to Russia at that moment was a strategic mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. It was a clear calculation, because they believe, at least a good part of the leadership believes, that the West is declining. They should invest in Russia, particularly in China, and that's the calculation. So good luck trying to make some changes.
Well, that would be the one. Look to the east, not to the west. But we will address that, because I'd like to know if for Iran this is actually working or not. But maybe immediately while we're talking about the nuclear deal, if you address that question, Sanam.
I think that there have been many twists and turns to Iran's thinking on the JCPOA. And I'm of the mindset, and have always been, that we cannot look at Iran in a monolithic way. Politics does matter, to quote Iran's former foreign minister, and there are cleavages in the Iranian system that have divergent views on engagement with both East and West. Currently, the dominant faction in Iran are the conservatives, and within conservatives there are also cleavages, including neoconservatives and pragmatic conservatives. And within the conservative camp, thinking has very much shifted. There was hope, I think, in around March, April of this year, that a JCPOA would come to fruition. But my analysis and conversations have sort of showed that the war in Ukraine did actually impact and have spillover in the JCPOA negotiations. Hardliners in Iran are close to hardliners in Russia. And those conversations have influenced Iranian thinking to wait, to demand more from Western negotiators in this process. And as time has gone by and Iran has not been able to extract more in this process, I think that hardliners in Iran are also looking at the war, looking at Putin's positioning and seeing Russia's nuclear positioning as a strength, and a strength that could ultimately be Iran's trump card in attaining the security and stability that has been the long sought after quest of the Islamic Republic. So where does that leave us today? It leaves us with a fragile JCPOA, which we could very well see a recommencement of talks in Vienna in the coming months, perhaps to drag things along, delay the return of snapback sanctions or a dispute mechanism on Iran. Just a second. But I do think that ultimately the Iranian establishment sees its nuclear program as its most important card that it's holding. And in the context of the protests, in the context of increased pressure with regards to Iran's exportation of drones, its nuclear program is its most valuable asset. And I don't think it's going to surrender or compromise in that arena at a time where it's under pressure.
Well, while on that, do you think the Iranians actually want a deal? Yes or no?
Again, you can't say Iranians. There are elements in Iran that do see value in a deal, but I think the door to that deal and the value of that deal is closing as Europe's position is hardening. The sanctions that are going to continue are not going to encourage European economic investment in Iran, and the Supreme Leader and the Office of the Supreme Leader strongly support a resistance economy that is based on indigenous domestic production and stronger regional linkages in order to keep the Iranian economy less dependent on the West and Europe for survival.
That was a long answer, but here's another short answer I want. Do you think the Iranians, if there was no JCPOA, do they really want a bomb?
I think they're getting close to making that decision, and sadly that choice is the bomb is of value.
You're raising your hand. You must have a strong opinion here.
Very quickly, the bomb in the basement option, I think, has always been part of the calculation from day one, going back to behind the genesis of this program during the Iran-Iraq war. Number two, to your point about do they want a deal, they certainly don't want a 2015 deal. They want a different deal, which is why the negotiations have been so difficult, because they're demanding all sorts of new...
Sure. And the reason I asked whether they want a bomb, because sometimes the threat of developing one is greater, and that gets them more out of the world than actually having one, but that's debatable. But this is a good place where I can ask you, Dr. Ketbi, and that is, what is it that the Gulf would like to see in a deal? Last time, we're pretty much left out. This time, I don't know if they feel left out or not, but if they are, what is it that they want to be part of? What's their demand? What's their expectation? And are they listened to? It really is important as regional powers who are actually at the front of the conflict. Please.
Before answering this question, I would like to add and comment to the fact that does Iran want to have this nuclear weapon and or to stay on this threshold is a better situation. In my opinion, that the announcement of Iran that it has nuclear power, it makes her lose a lot of volume, even those who are keen on really signing a deal with the Europeans in particular, and the other powers, including China and Russia. But to stay on this nuclear threshold would cost a lot. That everyone is coming after you so that you do not move or change into a nuclear power. You can practice blackmail on everyone and keep them in this situation to really be subjected to the conditions that you want when it comes to the situation of the agreement. I go back to your question. The Gulf countries have no objection whatsoever so that Iran has a nuclear program, but peaceful. The Gulf countries see that the enrichment, 60% enrichment or 90% enrichment, this is not considered peaceful. It is an armament program headed in another direction. In addition to that, the rocket capabilities in the agreement of 2015, the Gulf countries, they weren't really taken into consideration. They weren't invited to this agreement, and their opinions were not taken into consideration, and their fears were not taken as well into consideration. And the concern was the regional infiltration, the militias, the rockets. Now, in this phase, we can add the drones program that it used, and the militias, Iran-backed militias were used these drones, whether in Yemen or in Saudi or in other areas. We are not against the agreement. Iran says that all these armament programs are targeted against Israel and against the Western presence in the region. But when you believe that or accept that, you can see that what you're doing against these forces, that you think that it is threatening its security. You are targeting the Gulf, attacking the Emirati oil convoys and the UAE. I do not see any Iranian rocket which has targeted Israel or a drone heading towards Israel, even as a part of the militias. The Gulf countries are calling for peace and not calling for war. War doesn't really serve the Gulf countries. We have witnessed more than a war in the Gulf, and it was catastrophic and on our security, on our economy, and on our expenses. We can say that this armament in the region, Iran, when it is getting armed and it is directing its own rockets towards the Gulf and that of the drones, will push the other countries to do something contradictory, to get armed and to import arms from other countries, and would like to be a nuclear power to face the other nuclear program, and therefore the armament would increase in the region, and this will affect negatively on the peoples of the region. Thank you very much indeed. Answering the first question, yes. In my opinion, that the most important problems that the Gulf is facing in bringing back the relations with Iran to its normal state is the issue of the dichotomy of the decision-making process in Iran and the Gulf, feeling that there is a kind of, feeling on the Gulf area, and the refusal of Iran to participate, the participation of the Gulf in discussions that is of interest to its own security, which is the not accepting the presence of the GCC on the negotiations table of the nuclear program. It was an example for that. And now with the presence of the Ibrahim Raisi government, I think that both problems in one way has gone, and there is no dichotomy in the decision-making process in Iran. And therefore, what happened in reality, that instead of suffering from this dichotomy of the revolution and the revolution has controlled the country and the government, and now in Iran, there is a revolutionary organization that is leading the country. So the presence of the Raisi government from within Iran in its revolutionary ideas and its closeness to the Revolutionary Guard has ended the dichotomy, but to the interest of the revolution. And this means that we need to get ready for a different pattern in our relations with Iran, even in the past. The true authority was in the hands of the higher mentor. Now we know with whom we are talking. We used to talk with Zarif, and Zarif did not have the authority, whereas the Saudi-Iranian dialogue, which happened in Baghdad, was with the presence of the Higher Council for National Security, Iran's national security, which represents the country, not the foreign ministry, which doesn't have the authority now. We know with whom we're talking. The policy that was suggested by the government of Ibrahim Raisi, it is accepted now with the Revolutionary Guard, whereas the openness adopted by the government of Rouhani was refused by the Revolutionary Guard and had a veto. And therefore, we have seen that this is the beginning of the international relations, which was adopted by the RIF. It's a liberal essence, which is based on the idea of diversity and participation in the region to solve problems. This was prohibited by Khamenei. And now we have a government that adopts the idea of the Revolutionary Guard, the building of the force, and to provide a credible threat and to open the door for dialogue. This is the mindset that Iran is talking with or is using. And I think that ignoring this Iranian dogma is that it is very hard to solve, and we cannot really ignore, and it's not a solution. We need to really open this dogma without really optimism, and we need to realize that there is always a place for solution, but this path for solution will not be based on quick solutions. Thank you very much indeed. I shall go back to Sanam Vakil.
Difference, because the Supreme Leader, after all, is the ultimate decision maker, whether it's JCPOA, the overall policies, international policies. But there seems to be some difference. But Mr. Raisi came to power on the premise and on the promise that he would bring certain things to conclusion, and JCPOA could have been one. But at the same time, there are a lot of internal dynamics changing. There are protests, there are power struggles. Whether they will delay the JCPOA, irrespective of the international environment, you tell us, what has changed since Raisi came, and what do you expect will happen? Maybe I could push you a little bit further. You might even want to project beyond the Supreme Leader's current Supreme Leader. Will things change, or is the regime being institutionalized enough to have the state adopting those policies? Therefore, the chances of things changing is less, and the chances of things being predictable is more. Please.
Thank you. So I think that there are a number of challenges that the Islamic Republic is facing. While the leadership has more of a ideological consensus with conservatives in place in all of Iranian institutions, both elected or appointed, there are divisions within that system that have yet to be reconciled. Also, this new generation of political appointees, bureaucrats, and leaders that are emerging in Iran are leaders that have been born, bred, and fed in the Islamic Republic. They have less interaction and engagement with the international community. They did not go to university in Ohio State or in Michigan. These are children of the Iranian Revolution. They have gone to school in Iran. They have been educated in Iran. They have not received visas to travel broadly. And so what does that mean? They have less awareness of the world and a lot of deep connectivity to their country and the system. This matters very much because if we're projecting into the future and considering Iran's worldview, threat definition, and future planning, you're dealing with a cohort of political leaders that feel deeply nationalistic, deeply loyal to the political establishment, the Nizam in Iran, and at the same time, they are not being empowered because the system in Iran has been guided and led by Ali Khamenei, who has been in power for over 30 years. He is currently the longest ruling leader in the Middle East today. And succession in Iran will be a defining moment for Iran's political transition. It's very hard to predict what that transition will be because we've only seen that transition once, in 1989. And there are various scenarios that we can all imagine and that are discussed primarily abroad, but also inside Iran, as to how that transition might unfold. We could see a traditional transition with a new supreme leader. We could see a council emerge, and that has been discussed in the past. There are people that talk about a Reza Shah model emerging in Iran. Returning to a military tradition. There are all sorts of scenarios that could emerge, but one thing that I'm certain about is that pressure on Iran, but from within and from without, doesn't allow for a public discussion of that process. And while it remains opaque, the political establishment in Iran remains stagnant. You do not see bold decision-making. You do not see any decision-making. And that, I think, is what has come to define President Raisi's brief tenure so far as president. Second element, of course, are the protests that have rocked Iran now for 2 months and probably will continue in the coming weeks. Protests are not new to the Islamic Republic. You can go back to the 90s where there were huge riots based on the economy. In 1990, there were student protests. In 2009, there were politically driven protests where Iranians asked, "Where is my vote?" In 2017 and in 2019, economic protests. And today, we have an amalgamation of all of those grievances coming out in these protests that have been going on since September 21st.
I'm going to stop you on that because I want to come back to you on the protest.
Okay.
And actually, I would rather ask you later, but think about it, is how the Iranian government is actually handling it, successfully or not, and where do you think this may go? So I'll leave you with those thoughts, but I'll go to Alex on this power succession and its reflection on foreign policy and the way that the United States might handle this, or the Europeans and others. And we talked about looking west or east, whether Iran is actually going all the way to the east and whether it's working for them, or do you think the Gulf and the Middle Eastern guys, as well as the United States and Europe, would be better off trying to pull Iran back to the west, engaging them some way? You tell us what might be the thinking at the moment from the US point of view, if you like.
Tough question. Look, I think, last time the United States deliberately wanted to sort of be a player in the Islamic Republic and shape the calculations of the totality of the regime in terms of where it was going was during the Reagan administration, which, blew him in his face with the Iran-Contra affair. I mean, that whole affair was about trying to move close to the so-called moderates inside the Islamic Republic to shape their calculations. But there was one big difference between then and now. Then you had the Soviet Union still alive, and the United States was very much in the business of bringing as many countries to its side, and that was the big motivator. We haven't had a Soviet Union since '91. The United States didn't look at Iran as that pride real state for a long time. Although, as we've heard yesterday and today, the world is changing. China is rising. Does United States national interest, is it served better by Iran being a gas station for China? I mean, already the Iranians are giving plenty of oil to China at a massive discount. So much of U.S. position on Iran's relations with China would obviously be shaped by Chinese-American relations. But the way things have been going, I would suspect the United States will start thinking more in terms of we cannot afford a country the size of Alaska, or 3 times the size of France, with a population of 85 million, to just simply become a vassal state of China and Russia. And I think that is going to be more intensely debated going forward because of power competition that we've seen sort of become more of our everyday life.
Thank you very much. A brief round, I don't know, I'm just not going to push you about protests, but it would be interesting to see how the Gulf look at these protests. Clearly, the Arab media are focusing on it, and the Western media as well. Looking at it, you would think that the regime might be shaken or threatening, but actually, we know that inside Iran, many people don't even know it exists. It has not been that much of a shakeup, and the Iranian government seems to be taking its time and not necessarily that worried. They have a threshold, but at some point they will. Yeah. So they have been threatening to move in a big way, but we know how deep-rooted establishments like this are. But they often accuse the international community or the external interventions and so on, and usually the Arabs take the brunt of that. So I don't know if you want to comment on this, both of you actually, from the Arab point of view.
يعني الاتهام موجه للخليجيون.
Well, the Gulf states have a big image and a great aura. The Americans are accusing the Gulf of interfering in their elections, and the Iranians are accusing the Gulf of interfering in their political system and fomenting the protests. And this is funny. It is not the case. It's not true. I think that we do believe that any instability in Iran would impact negatively the stability of the region. And what I want to say is, as an observer and follower to the Iranian issue, I think that this protest about the hijab, the veil, this represents the middle class. But if you go to the grassroots, most of them are conservatives, and most of them won't agree with removing the veils and the hijabs from the streets. I think that in a society like Iran, there is a vertical and horizontal panorama. There are protests in the Sunni areas, and if any protest happen there, there will be nothing in the Shiite areas. If there are protests in the marginalized areas, in Ahwaz or somewhere, there will be this game of mutual blame. And we know that the Iranian society has a lot of excuses. I'm talking about the Iranian regime, and always laying the blame on a kind of intervention by the West. I hear that the West, when it says that the Iranian regime is about to collapse, I disagree with that. I think that the Iranian regime is strong as it is now, but still it cannot continue living in the same way it is dealing with the neighbors. It should have this vision of serving the interests of the entire region, and not stealing water from Iraq, because this will create problems in Iraq, and these problems will not stay in Iraq but will spread to Iran, because what Iran is doing is taking the water from some rivers in Iraq. And I think that if this Iranian regime wants to live peacefully, it should look at the interests of other neighbors. There was the latest protest and the impacted the image of Iran. I think that the American and the Western perspective is still the same. We saw that the sanctions from the West created resentment in Iran by the public and the Iranian regime. And these sanctions stopped the appeasement with the neighbors in this region that started during Ibrahim Raisi. And now we started to see the repercussions in Kurdistan and in Arab Gulf countries, etc. So I think that the external factor is interacting with the internal factor. I would like to comment on the relation with Russia and going eastward, as Ms. Sanam said. It is not necessary that this approach of going east is harmful to the Gulf countries. The opposite is true. If there is an interest that the Gulf can seek is talking about Iran with Russia and China and not with the West, because what is being proven now is that the impact on the decision-making in Iran is in the hands of Russia and China and not in the hands of US. And the Western countries do not have the necessary tools to convince Iran to change course. So why not try in the East, and I mean here Russia and China. On the other hand, the Gulf started to diversify its alliances with Eastern powers. And we want this collaboration to be calculated, because we do not want Iran to be supported by weapons by Russia and China in a way that will destabilize the security in the region.
And I asked you what you think the Iranian government must be thinking, because my hometown, Khoisanjak, was actually hit yesterday by a few missiles, and that's not the first time. The previous time, a whole school of children destroyed. So that reflects vulnerability, reflects kind of a reaction, whether that's to localize it, to distract, God knows. But you tell us what might be the thinking, that how they are tackling it. Is it working, or is it going to carry on, just projecting it?
Well, I don't speak for the Islamic Republic, or I have to approach this with a degree of humility. I'm examining the issue from the outside like everybody. I would say that the protests are impactful because, as I was saying before, they have brought together a number of important cleavages in Iranian society, be them women, young girls, which is really important, and a sort of new development, laborers. You have a sectarian, ethnic dimension to the protests. You have middle-class protesters. And students. So this is a weaving together of a variety of protest movements, and suggests, obviously, that there are deep-seated grievances across many constituencies in Iran. At the same time, though, I would agree with Dr. Ebtesam, the Iranian state is institutional, it's bureaucratized, and despite the personal leadership of the supreme leader, the system is strong, and it has a monopoly of force, and it has a monopoly of wealth that it instrumentalizes to manage the protests. It has a crackdown playbook that it has developed through all of these decades of protesting. It updates that playbook, and it includes everything we've seen over the past few weeks, from brutal violence and repression, detentions, internet slowdown and stoppage, to blaming external parties. And the external dimension is important in this narrative because of the domestic implications here. Any type of protests in the ethnic and sectarian areas are seen to be fifth column supported. And when the Iranian government responds, also in your hometown, it is to clamp down and send messages abroad, but it is also to create unity among the political establishment that is divided about these protests. Ultimately, a bond for the Islamic Republic and the leadership is the territorial integrity of Iran, and that should be understood.
Okay, that's lovely. just very briefly, tell us about, is there conspiracy outside? Well, what are the Americans, the Israelis, the Arabs, in your opinion, your analysis? Because this is what maybe Iran wants to accuse, the external factors, but how real are they?
Very quickly, Sanam and I both have been out of Iran for so many years, but nonetheless, what is happening in Iran, if you hear Iranian officials themselves describe it, is fundamentally different. So that's their conclusion in power in Tehran. They don't know what to do with it, but the fact that 70% of the protesters they've arrested under age of 20, Generation Z, which is just coming out, politically maturing, they have no idea how to deal with this. There are about 7 million of them. How do you deal with that 7 million extremely angry part of your demographic is something they have to resolve. In terms of the conspiracy, look, it's no secret that plenty of foreign actors have an interest to be involved in Iran's affairs for obvious reasons we know. And it's not that the Iranians aren't involved in other people's affairs. So you go out there, you do things, you invite retaliation. But I would say about the issue of grievances, echoing what Sanam said, look at the root causes. No intelligence service could bring the people to the streets. So really, the root causes are about policies that outsiders could take advantage of, but why people are in the streets is because of the policies of the Islamic government.
Thank you. Very helpful. We're going to finish at 1:15 no matter what. David Makovsky, you've got a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the interesting panel. I'd like to ask if what the experts see are the implications for Iran if Russia is seen as losing the war in Ukraine. What does it mean for Iran's standing in Syria and other parts of the Middle East? That's question one. And
question one is addressed to whom? Let's not make
whoever wants to answer. The second question is just related to the issue of on the drones that Russia's gaining from Iranian drones. Russia's gaining the experience that Iran has had for decades in evading international sanctions. Is there a tangible way to say what Iran is actually getting from this relationship beyond general sense of being part of a resistance economy? Are there tangible benefits for Iran in that relationship? And if I could sneak in a third, or is that too much?
No, that would be too many. And just one moment. You get the first and you get the second, so that we're specific. Yeah. We have Mohammed Alzghoul. Still here? طيب. We've got Abdullah Rabah. No. Bilal Saab. Bilal Saab?
Yes, thank you.
Father.
I'm right here, sir.
Yes.
Thank you, EPC, for the invite. Thank you, Dr. Ebtesam. Congratulations on the 9th edition of ADSD. I have a question about the security dialogue between Iran and the Gulf states. And I think this is a point that Dr. Ebtesam made earlier, and I want to follow up on that. It's obvious that the Iranians are far more worried about the American military presence in the region and also Israeli military capabilities, less so about Gulf military capabilities. So when you enter into a dialogue with the Gulf states and you're worried about something else, how likely is it that you really are going to achieve a fruitful outcome in that dialogue when you're talking about two different things?
Okay. Finally, Ali Al-Shayban. Ali Al-Shayban.
هنا صحيح. I will here. Yes. I will handle my question in Arabic because it goes directly to Dr. Ebtesam.
Dr. Ebtesam, no one is talking about the ideological expansion of Iran. Is it part of the political equation, or is it just a cover for the Iranian project? Thank you very much.
You far away, your third one.
When there was a sense that Iran was going to go from 60% to 90% enrichment, weapons grade, the EU ministers wrote a letter talking how they would support more snapback, more sanctions. can you, anyone on the panel, Dr. Ebtesam, anybody else, envisage the Gulf ministers now issuing a similar warning now that there is no JCPOA and they have 60% enrichment and it maybe takes 2 weeks to get to 90% enrichment? So any public or even a private move by the Gulf on, given that there is no JCPOA right on the table, it seems at this moment.
Okay. Princess, you had 2 questions, and you can help as well. Do you remember them?
You have put me in trouble when saying princess. I've been taken to the jail now.
You're my princess.
No. فيما يتعلق يعني أجمع بين التفاوض.
Regarding the negotiations with Iran, this is a Gulf problem, and it is emanating from the way the Iranians deal with the Gulf states. Iran refuses to deal with the GCC as a bloc. Iran prefers to put all the issues that are problematic in the same basket and discuss that basket with the Gulf. For the GCC countries, they go individually and separately to talk with Iran. And this is something that is preferred by Iran. What I said in the beginning is there is the armament topic, the incursion of Iran, the militias of Iran in the region, what Mr. Ali Al-Khshayban said about the use of the sectarian card in destabilizing the region. All these issues are thorny and depressing, and they are not new. They are there on the table since decades, and they are still on the table. But how are you going to tame the tiger? I said in the beginning that there is the mentality of the bazaar in the Iranian government. The Revolutionary Guard are traders, and most companies in Iran are monopolized by the religious leadership. So when we put these topics together and try to discuss them with Iran, we do not reach an agreement. I don't think that there will be a solution to that. The recent statement by the United Arab Emirates in the Security Council, it reiterated that 3 islands that are part of UAE are still colonized by Iran, but still there is a stalemate. There is no solution. So what we are doing is working on the things that we agree upon, and regarding the problematic issues, we put them aside and we bet on solving them diplomatically, but without necessarily making us stop the dialogue. I agree this idea about taming the Iranian regime. I think that it is for the interest of the West and the Arab countries in order to tame the Iranian state, and especially that it is like a game against the gorilla. Iran is still leading its issues with the mentality of the revolution, the Islamic revolution. It is not moving to the next level. I think that this bias of Iran to Russia and helping it militarily, I think that Iran was not considering that as the best option. It bet on blackmailing the West using that card and waiting the winter, which means waiting till the West needs direly the gas of Iran, and then Iran could at that time take some concessions from the West regarding the achievement of a new JCPOA. But what happened? There was something that sudden, and the deal was struck with Russia.
Ways that Iran gets anything out of closer relations with Russia? That's a very good question, and I think it's too early to sort of have a specific answer because the data just isn't there. What we do know is there are two drivers behind closer relations, or I should say, what we do know is two drivers have really kept Iran and Russia close together for some time. One is the personal relationship between Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei with Vladimir Putin. That has been there since year 2000. So that's a long relationship, and it really does matter. I mean, Vladimir Putin is the only foreign leader who shows up in Tehran and goes straight to the office of the Supreme Leader. He doesn't even bother to go to the presidential palace. Number two is the anti-Americanism. And that anti-Americanism has been a glue that has kept relations close, but it's just become that much more important, the anti-Americanism, because of the war in Ukraine. So today, Russia has overtaken Iran as the most sanctioned country on earth. Iran used to be the most sanctioned country. Now Russia is more sanctioned, but Iran's number two. So number one and the number two most sanctioned countries on earth have plenty to talk about in terms of how to confront the Western agenda, as they would call it. But it's too early to say how it's working out because there's structural problems. Russia and Iran are basically competitors. The oil and exporting countries, they compete in the same markets. The Russians right now are undercutting Iran in India, in China, in UAE. So it's too early to say, but geopolitically speaking, the United States is what keeps Moscow and Tehran hand in hand, at least for now.
Thank you. Sanam.
To add to what Alex said, I think that there are some other benefits in terms of symbolism. Iran likes to showcase that despite all Western efforts at containing Iran, it doesn't remain isolated. And it employs opportunistic regional and foreign policy strategies, capitalizing on crises to showcase that it has diversified relations. And this war offers Iran that opportunity to take it forward. It can play out positively also for Iran at the UN, should JCPOA negotiations de-escalate as we're sort of foreseeing, where Russian veto will be important. Russia also helps Iran with technology transfers, as does China. Surveillance technology has become ever more important, particularly in these protests. That sort of technology has helped Iran in controlling dissent and repressing protesters, so that's also important. And it remains to be seen what this MOU that is on the table between Russia and Iran could really bring about. They are competitors, but there will be some effort to showcase the economic synergies that could develop from two marginalized, resistance-based states.
We did say we'll finish at 1:15 no matter what, and thank God it's even much earlier, but I use the time to remind you how difficult it is to put a panel together and such a big conference. I want to thank on your behalf the organizers and the team, the army behind that. Thank you, and I thank you for filling this room and coming back and listening to this important topic. And I very much hope that my colleagues and I will have met your satisfaction, but I want to thank every one of you for being so generous with your time and thoughts. And Dr. Ketbi, Dr. Sanam Vakil, Dr. Alex Vatanka,
Very good
Dr. Mohammed Alzghoul. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.